All right. Hi, Jasmine.
Hi.
So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. My name is Anna Ward. I'm the Grads and Program Manager for the Feminist Research Institute at UC Davis. And I am thrilled to be talking with one of the Feminist Research Institute's graduate fellows for this year, Jasmine Wade. Jasmine is a cultural studies graduate student at UC Davis, and is here to talk about her project, Archives of Futures, which of course fit in nicely with FRI's theme this year, which was Feminist Futures. So it was a great fit, obviously. So before we really get into it, tell us a little bit about this project and the website that you created.
Awesome. So with Archive of Futures, as it stands right now, I'm calling for and curating artifacts from the next 200 years. And so what that's meant is, people have been thinking about what apps we might see in the next 200 years, what stories might come up, what people predicting, even the election in the next few months, kind of looking, or what might come of this whole COVID-19 situation, and just thinking through, imagining what our future might look like, and also maybe what we would like it to look like.
So people are essentially crafting what could be artifacts, but from moments that have not yet happened.
Exactly.
So you're having people kind of push themselves into thinking about what the possible futures might be.
Yes.
Do you have the website or some submissions that you could actually show?
So I guess first I'll show my submission to the archive. It is, because I'm that nerd, the index of a book that hasn't been written yet. And here we go. So can you see that, Anna?
Yeah.
Okay. So the book is The Rise and Fall of the American Empire, the 5th and final volume. And what I basically did was go through and create, what could be part of the index of this particular volume. And thinking about, I don't know, it's just, I kind of geeked out a little bit thinking about what indexes do and how they indicate what a text says, or the pieces that are involved in a text.
Right.
And so there's all kinds of stuff here.
I like the section on decolonization.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
I know.
There you go.
Yes. I had so much fun with this, and it feels incomplete. I think I'm submitting something that feels not quite, and I think that's been tough for me as a writer, as an artist, to submit something that doesn't feel quite as polished, but I think I want to emphasize that I think the submissions to the archive don't have to be perfect in the way that we think of them, and I think even the kind of the roughness of the index, I think, is important. Even thinking about how futures can be flexible, or how futures can be imperfect.
Right. Interesting section too on nostalgia.
Yes.
1950s and the 1990s. And then a subsection on delusion with respect to nostalgia.
Yeah, there's
Kamala Harris makes an entry there.
I know. So I worked on this a bit before we got as deep into the 2020 election as we did. I had different hopes.
Right. Interesting. And so I know you're still accepting submissions, of course, but have you received some already?
Yes, I can show you one. Let's see. So I have a piece of visual art. Okay, so there's two actually here. One you can see is just a example that I drew up of the "Don't Touch My Hair" laws that might be passed at some point in the next 100 years, I'm hoping. Especially as we now have laws on the books that say you can't get fired for having your natural hair.
In California, right?
California, not no.
Okay.
In California.
You gotta be really clear.
Yes. It's not everywhere yet.
Yeah.
That we're on a path where the kind of laws allowing folks to uphold and protect their own personal space may emerge in the future. That's a dream. Mm-hmm. And then this one is a submission from an artist called The Goddess. And so one of the interesting things with this, I don't know the story behind it yet. So part of what I've been doing is going back and forth with artists and asking for blurbs, descriptions, like what, and trying to get a sense of when they think this is happening, where they think this is happening. And so this goddess is appearing, hopefully in this artist version of the future, a couple 100 years from now.
Wow. And so, and you've already started receiving submissions from people that you don't even know, right? You don't have connections to?
Yes. People I don't have connections to. I've also been, it's been interesting. I've been talking to archivists lately about this project, thinking about how to structure it. And specifically because I decided that it would be an archive and not an anthology or, you know, just a kind of digital repository of art. So in talking with archivists, they've been reminding me that I'm a curator, not an editor. And so that's been kind of an interesting hat to put on.
Sure.
So I've also been reaching out to folks who I know do this kind of work and asking, like, can we include such and such and link back to your website? Or can we include, you know, this artifact that you created for such and such exhibit or that appears on your website, you know?
So do you have archivists that are actually submitting as well? Because of course I'm, you know, my nerd out moment is what would archives look like in the future, right? Do you have anybody kind of thinking about that and maybe possibly crafting a submission around what an archive is going to look like?
I have not yet, but that's a great idea. I should reach out to them.
I was going to say, I've got some ideas for you.
Okay.
For another time. Well, this is amazing. Do you have happen to have the website on here that you could actually just sort of show us even the homepage?
Yes. All right. How's that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is the homepage. And so basically what I did for the call for submissions is I created a descendant. So some, you know, my children's child, 200 or so years from now, who is inviting folks to submit artifacts from the years 2020 to 2220 that will go in this home that I imagined is kind of part museum, part art gallery, part school, named after Octavia Butler.
Right.
And then, so I mentioned a couple examples. This is fictional, but thus far we've been pleased to receive a donation that includes photographs from the 2023 Black Women's March that led to the Don't Touch My Hair law in 2027. The original designs for the Secretary of Arts Education, Janelle Monáe's half android body. So just, you know, ideas.
Yeah, well, I was going to say we've got to figure out how to actually actualize this by
getting
Janelle Monáe involved in the.
Yes. Well, and I think there's some stuff in the works. Like I'm working with a couple people in the Bay thinking about reenacting the march up California that the characters did in Parable of the Sower, in Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. And so kind of like what would it mean to kind of reenact those scenes from a dystopian future?
Right.
And then, you know, taking pictures and putting that in the archive. So it's, yeah, I think it's part people submitting things, but also, you know, I'm developing partnerships with like the Museum of Children's Art in Oakland to set up workshops and spaces where children can submit and think about the futures that they want. Yeah, I'm hoping to also do some kind of guest appearances in other places.
Amazing. Well, so that actually might be a good segue into talking about kind of what the inspiration was behind this project, what kind of planted the seeds of this project for you. And I'm gonna hazard a guess that Octavia Butler has something to do with it. So talk to us a little bit about kind of your inspiration for this project.
So I think it was a kind of a convergence of things. I consider myself an Afrofuturist, kind of in like politically, but also as an artist. So like I've been writing Afrofuturist stories, and my dissertation is probably gonna be part Afrofuturism if my city allows such a thing. And so I was thinking about that always, even before PhD life.
Right.
But then I got to Davis and read Saidiya Hartman for the first time. And that was like really a transformative experience. I'm trying to think what I read first. I read Venus in Two Acts, her article, where she talks about critical fabulation as being all kinds of things, but in my memory, like allowing fiction to do some reparative work in archives. That's an oversimplification. I encourage people to actually read the article. But yeah, and then I read, what did I read? Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman. And so there's this scene in Lose Your Mother where, or maybe it's a whole chapter, where she tells the same story 3 times from 3 different perspectives, right? And it's the story of the death of a woman who is enslaved and is on a ship in the Middle Passage, right? And the first story, I believe, is told from the perspective of the captain who kills her. And so the narrative that Saidiya builds is rooted in the archive. It's, transcripts and, all these different artifacts that she pulls together to inform the narrative. Then the second version is told by a witness, someone who, is on deck. He might've been the second in command, I can't remember right now. And then the third story, Hartman tells from the girl's point of view, right? And that story is almost entirely fiction because the archive there's no artifacts that give her a voice. And I come back to that chapter over and over again, and I'm just like, what? Just like the power of taking understanding the limits of the archive and then exceeding them in a way that is just really beautiful and powerful. And so I started to think about what that might mean as an Afrofuturist, like someone I don't do history. Not that history's bad. That's not my thing, right? So I was thinking about what fiction and archives might mean for the future.
Right.
And, related to my research and where my research interests lie.
Gotcha. So, well, let's actually end the share screen here.
Oh, yes.
You can see your wonderful background even larger.
My bad.
There you go. No worries. So what, because part of what you're having people do, right, is of course, a little bit different in the sense of Hartman, of course, is filling in gaps in a way and imagining the past that for, reasons of white supremacy and on, right, we don't have access to in the kind of traditional form of the archive. And so you're sort of taking that up, but also asking people to imagine into the future, right? So putting sort of that kind of Afrofuturist bent on it. So what is it that you hope this project will do, right? I mean, as researchers and scholars, and then of course you're also coming with a tremendous sort of background in terms of the creative arts as well. We always have a fantasy, right, about what our research can accomplish, and the kind of why are we painstakingly doing this work? What's at stake for you? Why does this research matter?
I think it's hard to visualize futures that we can't see. It's hard to realize futures that we can't see. And I think there's something powerful in taking a moment to create a thing that you think might be at some point in the future, or you think might, that might exist at some time. Whether, and it's funny because I get a lot of questions about whether or not this is a utopian project. And I think no.
Right.
We've gotten some submissions where I'm kind of like, oh, okay, that's dark. But I think there's also value too in imagining, what if things don't change? What if, things don't change the way that we hope they will, right, in the next 200 years? Like, what does that, imagining what that looks like, and then seeing, well, can we decide do otherwise? Or if that's the case, how do we continue to survive? How do we continue to be resilient in the face of this thing that we've imagined might happen? Right. I think these are important conversations. And I have, I'm also drawing on inspiration from both scholars, but also activists who are activists who are essentially doing the work of science fiction and trying to build worlds that don't exist yet. And I think we can help, in building these artifacts. I think the archive can offer inspiration. I think it can be a process of healing. I also think there's healing to be found in creating dystopian narratives. Yeah.
I mean, I know, in a different context, you and I have worked together in a teaching context, right? I have great fortune of having you as a teaching assistant. And one of the things I know that we've talked about that is always, I think, a challenge in the fields that we teach in, which are so much about what is identifying what is wrong, what needs addressing. It can get students a little kind of down, right, in that place of like, and so how do we get students to think about not just staying in that place of critique, right? But what do you want? Yeah. Right? Like, what do you want to see? What do you want of this world, right? And kind of moving them into that place. And I always think about your project. You also have a very strong background as an educator, right? And I can see that in the project that you created, right? Is how to kind of set up a project that allows people to step into that space of, okay, now you imagine, you think through these possibilities. Is there a part of this that, I always think about your work with respect to, I think it's Kilo Wazana-Tompkins has that bit about theory, that in some fields, theory is very much about thinking about the patterns of what are, right? Versus the way that she describes theory, which is, it's about, that idea of imagining otherwise, right? It's that theory is in part, if you can step back and sort of see a bigger picture, you can also see a bigger picture that can change, right? And could be a different reality. Is that part of it as well? Is that there's a part of speculation and the kinds of things that creativity can unleash that is also about theory building for you?
I think so. It's funny you bring that up. I just reread a piece by Toni K. Bambara, where she is talking about being her education of like how she became a writer and her education. Like I think the essay is called like The Education of a Writer or something like that. And how for her, theory didn't come in school.
Right.
It was this woman, Miss Dorothy, who would ask her questions and push her, and she would come home from the library and have all these like, I know Einstein's theory of relativity, and she's like, well, who else knows this? And she's like, well, no one knows it. I know it. I'm the one. I know this. And she's like, well, if your community doesn't know it, do you actually know it? If your community doesn't have this knowledge, what are you doing? And thinking about, so it's got me thinking about like the accessibility of theory, of where theory comes from, of the role of community in theory building. And even as I'm, currently working on curriculum for children, thinking about children as sites of futuristic theory building.
Oh, yeah.
And what that means and how fun I think that could be, especially because, the imagination of a child So, oh my gosh, it's so powerful. And I think they are able to see things that I, in all of my decades and all the jadedness that I feel now, like,
Right.
I just can't see. I can't imagine it now, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, because I also think about your work in relation to something like Jose Munoz's work around what queer is, and that queer is always about a horizon, right? That's sort of, imagining that horizon, and that there is something, obviously a half a dozen people have said it, but something very queer about children, right?
Yeah.
They're just out there, and they are not beholden to the kind of patterns and structures that we, despite ourselves or in spite of our best efforts, get kind of stuck in. And every time my son says something like that tastes yellow, or like does that thing where different categories kind of collapse in on themselves, I'm like, yeah, it does taste yellow. That's amazing. So yeah, I can definitely see why thinking about curriculum building with respect to children is very kind of tied up with this project as well. So so now I'm going to ask you a really easy question.
Okay, cool.
Are you ready? Really easy. What does a feminist future mean to you?
Oh my gosh.
I had to bring the theme back in here. So that's FRI's theme this year, is feminist future. What does that mean to you? Or maybe why did you see the call?
Why did I see that? Yeah.
And say, yes, of course, there's the future connection, but like, why did this feel like a theme that you could work within?
I think so my relation to the call, some of it was that so much feminist work is informing this project. I mean, Octavia Butler's kind of, the obvious one. And also Sadia Hartman, as I've mentioned before, and Toni K. Bambara. And, I feel like kind of steeping in Black feminism that has been imagining otherwise. And even thinking about like N.K. Jemison's work, and what that, like the way that she's imagining Blackness millennia from now,
right?
I think has been really informative of what this project is hoping to do. So like theory-wise, there's that connection, but I also saw potential here in the project trying to do some of the work that I see other feminist work trying to do in that like kind of reparative healing, educational type of feel, even if, and so I think it's been tricky, right, for the call for submissions, because I didn't want to constrain people or say I only want feminist submissions, because then that's just fraught with all kinds of stuff. And then I would have to define feminism, which who does that? So,
as someone that teaches intro to feminism, I don't know.
Right. Like,
no. Yeah. So you certainly don't want to go down that path too much.
No, exactly. But it has been interesting, and maybe it's just because of the circles that I've been able to reach. The people have been submitting things that I think would read as feminist futures, or things that think about gender in a particular way. There's one submission I'm thinking of where someone was trying to predict the evolution of the human body and what that might mean for our conceptions of gender and sex, years from now. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is a game changer. It's been interesting thinking through a lot of that. Yeah. Did I actually answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I could hold you to, okay, give me your feminist future, Jasmine, but no. And so, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, of course, how your project, contributes to getting people to imagine possible feminist futures, as well as futures that are different in all sorts of ways, right? Feminist could be one sort of identifier for it, but yeah, I mean, there was an obvious connection, I think, with the theme for FRI this year and your work on a lot of different levels. What was the experience like for you being an FRI graduate fellow. We weren't too bad, were we?
No, you all were very supportive. The project was surprisingly stressful. And I think part of it is like being a writer and an academic, I'm not very often like putting myself out there, or if I am, it's like I'm putting myself out there in the comfort of my own home where I can like freak out, you know, like sending out the article and then seeing like, oh, are they going to accept it? It's like nobody has to see the panic, you know, it's all happening privately. But I think this kind of project, or even putting out a story, even if the story is near and dear to my heart, I think, but doing something that was collaborative, you know, I was working with a kind of team of people in this stage of the process, and then also trying to convince people to submit, you know, and really, there was a lot of people dealing with people.
A lot of people work, yeah.
A lot of people work, which is a lot for this introvert. And then dealing with people on something that I think as I kept working on it, I started to realize how super duper important this project is to me. Like it's heart work in a way that I think I was not expecting. I probably in part because in grant proposals, it doesn't really sound like heart work. It sounds like
not a lot of heart in grant writing. No. Yeah.
You know, so when I pitched it to people, it's like, oh yeah, it's this like brain experiment. But the more I began to work on it and the more people, I mean, even just having conversations with people I know, and also just, you know, people at like Safeway about things, and they're like, oh yeah, like this thing could happen 100 years in the future. And I'm like, yeah, you know, it's like that connection, and I feel a little bit like I'm holding people's dreams and fears. And that feels like a big responsibility. And I was not expecting the kind of huge emotional piece of working on a project like this. Yeah. I mean,
I can't imagine the things even that people come up with on the fly, right? Yeah. And I don't even know what those conversations are, or want to know what those conversations are like right now, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a way, you know, I was thinking about your project just in relation to what's going on right now in terms of COVID-19, that I'm seeing that question being asked more and more. You know, is nothing ever going to be the same again? Or what is, you know, healthcare going to look like in 10 years? What's education going to look like in 6 months, right? You know, and this kind of having to project and the kind of fear that introduces for people, but also, you know, some folks going like, you know what, there's some things that need to just stay gone, right? And there are some things that are not worth saving, right? And kind of seeing, I don't know, just even folks with family members and friends that I'm talking to on the phone or what have you, just kind of thinking that question a little bit more than I've ever heard them in the past. So I imagine you're getting some good conversation around that right now.
Yes. Yes, for sure. You know, and also like people thinking kind of locally their own lives and relationships, and there's lots of dreaming happening, I think, is the conversations that I'm having, where people are even kind of like, all right, I might be ready to do that thing that I've been scared to do. Or, you know, people kind of trying to visualize what life might look like when we're allowed to be out and about again.
Right.
You know, or even I'm friends with a lot of entrepreneurs, and so there's been lots of like, okay, you know, thinking about, well, what does it mean to have a small business that is quarantine proof? You know, how do we prepare for these kinds of crises to come up again?
Right.
And not, you know, have it be completely devastating. I have been thinking a lot about specifically climate change and climate migrations, and what that might look like. I don't want to say too much, but what it might mean in you know, the next 200 years if staying in one, like living in one space becomes impossible because of the nature of the weather, the seasons, the climate, and how like the kind of new normal that might emerge because of that. and I think people are now thinking about like, well, what if pandemics become, especially like the way that globalization works and all these things, what if pandemics become part of a new normal? How do we prepare?
Right.
That's been interesting. There's been lots of conversations about like bug out bags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that, I mean, it kind of lends itself nicely to the question of since people are in that headspace right now anyway, and as you said, kind of doing all of this dreaming and, you know, also inventing nightmarish scenarios of the dystopian variety. But, you know, I know this is always hard to put yourself out there in this way, but what do you think in terms of your own just expertise and specialization and all that you've read and seen and contributed? What insight can you lend people in this moment? What do you say to those folks that are bringing all these dreams to you?
I say keep dreaming.
Yeah.
I think, you know, dreams are fertile ground. And I think they're important. They're so important. And I feel like often we think of, you know, the billionaires of the world as being very grounded and in kind of the realm of the concrete. But part of what I've been reading, thinking about like Amy Bong's Migrant Futures and Kara Keeling's, you know, what's the name of that book?
Queer.
We'll just edit that out.
Black Lives, Queer Futures?
Yeah.
Okay. Something like that.
You should figure that out.
I will double check that and link it up, don't worry. Book titles are always hard for me to remember.
Me too. But thinking about that, those books and how they present speculation as a fundamental part of capitalism.
Right.
You know, like there's speculation is constantly happening.
Yeah.
This capitalist system is always dreaming, and they're dreaming in ways that are not necessarily going to work for me. So right. I need to be dreaming too.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it can be tricky, right, to get so caught up in the moment, right? And not to say that the being, you know, present for the present is not important, but I also think it can be helpful to take some time to think about futures.
Right.
You know, and what we're working towards, what we're building towards, if we're building towards anything. Right. Yeah, I say keep dreaming.
Keep dreaming. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a lot of work out there, you know, that talks about that's part of it, right? Is that you get people just sort of on that little hamster wheel in their day-to-day, just trying to get by, and that's part of how, at least for some folks, things don't ever change. Yes. Right. Versus what you're talking about, which is, you know, there's at least a small group of people that are always thinking about the next thing and how to capitalize on it. So I think that's a really good point. So so keep dreaming. In the context of this moment, what has it done to your work? Right, here you are, a graduate student. I think you've got your exams, your qualifying exams, right? In like a minute, right? Yeah. You're working on this amazing project. You're you know, home, right? And you know, on one hand, right, you mentioned that you're an introvert and people work can be sometimes intense, but I imagine you're missing people a little bit right now. So so even the best of us introverts are going like, okay, I didn't mean that. Right. All that. So what has it been like for you, and what has it done for your kind of research trajectory?
I think it's been interesting, especially being in this moment of the qualifying exams where it's like the culmination of everything that I've been thinking about and reading and writing about for the last 3 years. It feels like a big moment. And I'm struck by how hard it's been to try to process all of this information and not be able to like be outside.
Right.
It's been, it's been hard. And I think it's got me thinking about, again, what might be coming down the pike, you know, like, is this the beginning of something?
Right.
Is this the beginning of a normal that I'm going to have to adjust to? Whether it be, you know, being inside. I mean, I think also, like, we're heading into summer, right? So we got the quarantine happening. And then summer in Sacramento is like boiling hot.
Yeah.
And seems to get hotter every year.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, am I actually going to go outside when this is
Right.
up? Maybe not, you know, depending on, I think it's supposed to be in like the 90s today, and it's May.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. And then after that, it's fire season, right? We've been having the fires where the air is, we literally can't be outside to breathe. And so I'm thinking of, if we're thinking of these seasons,
Mm-hmm.
will I be outside again before November?
You didn't put it so starkly, Jasmine. No. No, but I was thinking about that the other day too. Like, they're going to let us all out of our houses in June, and we're going to walk outside, and it's going to be 99 degrees, and we're going to go
Right back inside.
head back inside.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. It's. I think there's a general feeling of, are we in the middle of something? Are we at the beginning of something? Are we coming out of something? And kind of the mixed.
And it might be all of those things.
All of those things, right?
You know, I think that's the funny thing about, I've been thinking a lot about how time works or doesn't work, you know, and I think it's, and I also think just reading about, you know, how kind of work in which time is collapsing on itself, or is kind of not a straight line, but more like this blob that, you know, I've been watching a lot of The Flash, where they just disrespect time entirely. It's just, they're so disrespectful.
Yeah.
In ways that are really interesting, right?
Right.
But yeah, I think sci-fi kind of lends itself really well to moments like this, and thinking about, oh, well, what can we do? Not to say that we have kind of a blueprint, but I do think moments like this have been imagined.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be something to learn from, say, Octavia Butler, about how to handle something that feels like a dystopian, or something that feels like an apocalypse.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of what would Butler say right now?
She'd say, "I told you so," to be honest.
She's like, I'll take some more awards, please, because I totally called it. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what would, again, you know, easy question, but in addition to maybe helping people to, you know, value kind of dreaming more, right, and encouraging people to do that, what about this moment? I mean, what do you want to get rid of? Like, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to say, like, okay, Corona, you have this, you keep this, because this wasn't working anyway?
Yeah, I think my big dream is that Corona will take the healthcare system as is,
right,
and we'll be able to do something that actually works for us as a people. And yeah, that would be great. That's big dreaming though. That's like,
that's okay.
Keep
dreaming, John. Big dreams are okay.
On a local level, I don't know. You know, it's funny because I've even been thinking about like alternatives to toilet paper.
Yeah.
That's not too much like TMI, but like,
no, yeah,
you know, right. Just thinking like, is toilet paper sustainable type living? You know. And I think also thinking about, okay, if we take this kind of toilet paper as an object, and then imagine my timeline in which we are all inside until November.
Right.
Well, yeah, that doesn't really feel like the life that I want to live. So what does life look like post toilet paper? I don't know.
Post toilet paper. You know what? I think that would be a perfect submission for your website, right? There's like various ways to consume. I mean, obviously there's the bidet route. Right. So we could see some advancements maybe proceeding on that, but then of course you have the water waste thing, right?
So like somebody, and I wonder if like, what would is a portable bidet a thing? I don't know, actually.
I'd say you could just attach to your existing toilet. So I guess they're
like you're out and about, you know.
Oh, like really portable. You mean like portable, like the meaning of that word. No, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. Is my guess. So yeah.
Somebody should work that up.
Somebody should work that out. All right, I'm really glad that I've gotten your perspective on today. You're probably not expecting that of this interview, so my apologies. But that's real, right? Like I feel like that's part of what people are kind of toggling between are these like healthcare systems, climate change, disaster scenarios, like these big questions. And then like, you know, how long before this flour goes bad that I bought way too much of it, right? Like these really kind of practical daily questions of adjusting. And that's some of what I like about some of the work that's coming out of disability justice communities, right? Is kind of thinking about this kind of macro and micro levels that folks with various kinds of disabilities have been thinking about for a long time, right? Like get your bug out kind of system straight, right? In case you're able to leave the house because you're immunocompromised or whatever it is. But then of course, these huge structural questions of, yeah, we're going to need to get rid of the healthcare system. That's it. And so I've been really appreciating all of the kind of imagining and stuff that's coming out of that work online, especially from activists and whatnot. So I guess what are you hoping that people kind of walk away with when they actually are able to kind of get their hands on some of these amazing submissions that you've gotten and the kind of larger body of work of yours? What are you hoping people leave with, or a student, right, engaging with this work? I mean, however you want to conceptualize it, or if it moves into the community spaces, right? What do you want people to?
I hope people feel empowered. And I'm thinking of and I'm taking this disclaimer, I am taking this out of context. But in Sharon Holland's, what's that book? The Erotics of Racism.
Mm-hmm.
She very briefly talks about how white people own time. Mm-hmm. And Black folks in particular can't, like, just don't have access to a kind of ownership over time. And so the question she poses, like, what does it mean for a person who owns time to encounter someone who exists only in space? Mm. And I think about that, it's a paraphrase, it's not a quote, but I think about that a lot, that concept of who owns time, who is in charge of time, and what does it mean? I think about dreaming the future as a way to, and I want to say a small way, but it's also not a small way, mm-hmm. To steal a little bit of ownership of time. Mm-hmm. You know, and I hope, and this is partly why I'm trying to have the archive be a space where it's not just academics and artists, but where kind of anyone can dream up ideas, and where anyone can submit what they think might happen in the future, whether it be kind of big picture or locally, for their own lives. Yeah, I lost my train of thought on that one, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I think right now is, like, what does it mean to have a sense of agency in time? Right.
So the idea being that the people that encounter this work will kind of walk away with feeling like they can snatch a little bit of time back.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of what I feel like Saidiya Hartman was doing, maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't know that she would say that that's what she was doing, but that's how it read to me.
Right.
Like, it felt like she was, like doing a little, stealing something or reclaiming something, or something. And it's weird to do that with something intangible like time, but I think that's what was happening.
Right. So my last question is sort of what's next, and what do you need to kind of see this thing?
So next steps, we are accepting submissions to the archive on a rolling basis. So kind of submit whatever, whenever. I'm constantly checking the email. So yeah, I think that's always going to be up. I am moving into a different phase of it. Rather than trying to get people to submit, I'm trying to create situations with like workshops or guest lecturing, situations where there's a bunch of people in a space where they might create something for the archive. And I tested this out in my class at Sac State recently, and my students came up with some beautiful, beautiful things. I mean, I was like sobbing reading. I think it was so exciting. Yeah, so more of that, and also just kind of seeing what's already been done, because I think I don't want people to walk away from my website thinking that this work isn't already happening. It is, and I feel like I'm stepping into a genealogy of people who have been dreaming up the future for a long time now, and so I'm trying to like kind of find those folks and either at least be in conversation, if not find things to put in the archive.
Right. And you've got to when people go to the website and I think sign up for the
the prompt book. Yes.
Yeah, they get a prompt book as well.
Yes.
Right? So there are some ways in which people can be kind of helped out, let's say.
Yes.
If
there are prompts. So if you sign up for the mailing list on the website, then I will email you a prompt book. I am also regularly posting prompts on Instagram. Don't appear in the prompt book. So there are two separate kind of sets of ideas. The next batch on Instagram will probably be COVID-19 related.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Great. All right. So what we're going to do is when we post this video, we'll of course link your website. I guess link your Instagram, so you've got that to look forward to. You get a lot of random followers. No, and then we'll also link up some of the texts that you've mentioned, so people that want to explore all these things that were so generative for you can take a look at these things. And then of course, if you think of anything else after the fact that you're like, oh, people have got to read this or watch this. I lied. I have one more question for you, Jasmine Wade. One of the many things that we have in common, of course, is a love of pop culture.
Yes.
So obviously there's a little bit of Janelle Monáe shout out.
Yes.
Going on. But is there any other kind of pop culture that you feel like people need to be watching or listening to that you found to be particularly kind of generative for this project?
I have been thinking and also rewatching a lot of there's been kind of a flurry of maybe flurry is a strong word. There's been a number of movies and TV shows lately that center young Black women as being like the key to saving the world.
Right.
In a way that like is not necessarily, they don't necessarily read as heroes. It's not, it's not the Avengers, where it's like, oh, I'm here to save the world. And it's not like that. It's, it's not even T'Challa. That's a whole conversation.
I'm gonna put that on the schedule. Okay, great.
I'm thinking of The Passage, which aired on Fox, I think, for a season, which is the actress who plays the main character is she's stellar. Like, oh my gosh, I wish her all the hopes and good vibes, and hope she has many, many, many more acting things. And The Girl with All the Gifts. Mm-hmm. The zombie movie. It's a little bit scary. Real talk, I didn't see certain scenes because I just, right. But it's still good. It's a zombie movie unlike anything I've ever seen. So there's that. What is that movie called? In the Shadow of the Moon? Do you know that one?
I think that's right.
I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
Someone went the pitch that someone gave to me to go watch it was like, it's a futuristic Kindred.
Uh,
Octavia Butler's Kindred. And so I was like, oh.
Say no more.
I'm watching that tonight, you know. So that's a good one. There's one. Oh, and of course, Fast Color. I think Fast Color is a beautiful movie that has absolutely been sitting with me, in part because there is no like save the world plot.
Right.
It's just like, I think just people trying to live, which, you know, I think is a really important part, I hope, of the archive, just kind of that local day-to-day, what are we doing about toilet paper kind of questions, that are just important for life.
Yeah. All right, well, there we go. Now you've also given people 4 things that they can do, and you know, in all their free time right now.
Right.
Well, it was really good to talk with you, Jasmine, and thank you so much for, you know, taking a little break from the whole exam thing that you've coming up. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you this year in terms of the graduate fellowship for FRI, and we'll shout out your website and the readings that we talked about as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this project develops and where it goes, and yeah, really looking forward to seeing it kind of continue to evolve and how you respond, as I know you will, creatively to this strange moment of ours. So it was really good to chat with you, Jasmine.
Thank you.
See you soon. Hopefully in person.
Yes.